Anin bojo kinawea, Mijikayan dodam, Shkadenigan Wawaskunan Indigenous cause, Shwanagan Dunjaba, Anishinaabe Kweo Jibwe Bodawadami and Dow. This is your host, Kim Wheatley from Shawanaga First Nations, and this is Ancestral Voices We Belong. Very, very excited to start the new year off in a good way with a good heart and a good mind. And today we have a very special guest with us, one that I'm very excited and proud to host. His name is Jesse Wente, probably well known to most listeners. First and foremost, Jesse is a husband and a father. But across Canada, he's a well known writer, broadcaster, speaker, and arts administrator who was born and raised in Toronto. His family, his father's side, comes from Chicago, and his mother's side comes from Serpent River First Nations, which gives him his Anishinaabe and heritage. He's best known as a columnist for CBC Radio's Metro Morning, but also on Q, Unreserved, and more than 20 local CBC stations. Jesse is also a film critic and opinionated who has also guested on numerous television shows because you can't be famous enough. You need to also act, Jesse. You've got a lot on this bio here. Jesse is programmed for the Imaginative Film and Media Festival and the Real World Film Festival. And most recently, his first book, Unreconciled, Family, Truth, and Indigenous Resistance, is a national bestseller and a must-read. He's also released his first children's book, and it's called Danger Eagle. At the present time, Jesse is the storyteller in residence at the Toronto Metropolitan University, and he's working on his next writing projects. Welcome, Jesse. I'm truly honored to have you as a guest, sharing one of the most precious gifts we can give to one another, which is time.
Well, thank you so much, Kim. I'm delighted to be here, and what a wonderful introduction. So thank you so much for having me.
Bios always feel like brag books, right? They try to go over everything you've ever done to establish credibility, and we know who we are. Come on, isn't that enough? Maybe there'll come a time where we just have to say your name, maybe just Jesse, like Cher, Beyonce, you're just a one-name word. But I'm really happy to have you here.
Oh.
You like that?
I don't know that I do. There was a time, Kim, that might have appealed to me, and I think these days less so. I would find that a little more daunting to have that.
Yeah, I hear you. Fame comes with its own hiccups. Well, just to let you know, this podcast, Jesse, is focused on identity and belonging through the stories of people of color and the diverse intersectionalities therein. And when I started this podcast, I really wanted to highlight Black and Indigenous voices. And this is Black History Month. And about 5 years ago, I discovered some of my genealogy was definitely Black. And so I thought, how am I going to claim this in the public realms when I've been out there for 30 years already and everybody knows me as Anishinaabe? But here we are, and I have a wide array of guests come on, and just I like to have fireside chats. I like to explore what maybe people don't always hear about you when you're in your service role. But identity is a huge topic within and outside of Indigenous communities at this time. And you have stated that to simply exist is a white privilege that caused you to work at defining yourself. So my question to you is, how would you define yourself beyond your bio, of course?
Yeah, I mean, I lead with husband and father because I think those are more in my bio these days because I think that's a little more closer to my being instead of a list of the things I have done or am doing. And so I'm a much more focused these days on sort of my being than I am on my doing. In terms of other than that, I would say I'm an Anishinaabe man, and sort of stop there. I'm a Bear Clan.
Oh.
Those would probably be the things that would be more the sort of where I rest in terms of thinking of my. I don't like I've come to struggle with the idea of identity I prefer, you mentioned belonging. I much prefer belonging
Mm-hmm.
as a notion. And so in terms of where I feel I belong, it's as an Anishinaabe man who's Bear Clan. I think that sums it up.
Well, I think it's very truthful. And it's also the great unknown, in most Canadian minds. As soon as you say that you're Anishinaabe, there's a glazed over look that comes over most people's faces. And then when you say Bear Clan, uh, they don't understand that that's not a nation. It's a place of belonging. And we all want to
Mm,
belong. In your book, you spoke about, wondering if you were Indian enough. And we've all gone
mm,
through that. And it's occurred for me, in the last 5 years, like, am I Indian enough? And we use that internally. Of course, the politically correct term right now is Indigenous. And what we're experiencing across this country is similar to a witch hunt in some ways, with the whole discovery of pretendians, very high profile, and a lot in the academic realms. And it made me afraid for myself, because would people start digging into who I am? And indeed they did. And I was approached quietly, not publicly, and asked to, you know, uh, provide my, I don't know, my belonging, my place of belonging, and have some proof of that. And I was happy to do that. But I'm wondering what you feel about the current trend that's going on, because we're as Indigenous people in this country, we're struggling with so many things. And now we have this coming again. And we know it's directly tied to some of the colonial institutions like Blood Quantum and the Indian Act. But how are you feeling about what's going on in that area? Well,
yeah. So you dropped out a bit for me there at the beginning, but I think I know what we're talking about. This is the subject of my next book that
oh,
is just going through its edits, sort of right now.
yeah.
I think it's a really difficult subject.
Mhm.
I think it is maybe the most difficult thing that our communities face, just because it is so painful and it touches people in a really intimate sort of way that I
Yeah.
think is hard to navigate, and that it's a new issue in that it is an issue entirely born of colonialism. It's not something our communities have a long history of really dealing with or struggling with in terms of understanding how people belong to our nations or our communities. It's really something that has only been introduced in the past few hundred years. And in terms of the particular phenomenon of people claiming to belong to our communities, but not really belonging, that's really new, right? Like
Yeah.
that's certainly in terms of the current trend. That's in my lifetime new.
Me too.
And even if you want to extend it to people like Gray Owl, or sort of, like, it's still not old. Like and so, and I've had my own really intimate encounter with this issue that really hurt me.
Oh,
And it's I've gone through what I would describe as a nervous breakdown. I've had a heart attack. I've had a lot
mm,
happen since that episode,
wow.
that I would attribute or connect to that. And so I understand really intimately how harmful it can be when you are in a relationship with someone, and mine was a professional one, that their sense of belonging is different than my understanding of how we belong, or how we would sort of even claim that sense of belonging. Um, so I really wanted to write a book about my experience there, what that was like, and mostly how I recovered and
Right.
what I've done, sort of how it felt to come onto the other side. Because interestingly, I would say I'm more settled in my belonging now, having gone through that,
That's
than I
beautiful.
was even when I wrote my first book. My first book, Unreconciled, obviously the title is a nod to the era of truth and reconciliation,
Hmm.
in which we are struggling to be within. But it was also a nod to how I felt about my own Anishinaabe identity or belonging, however you want to put it. And it was something I was trying to reconcile and to come to grips with, because like so many, I didn't grow up in my community. I didn't grow up in my language. I didn't really
Yes.
grow up in my culture. I grew up in the city, which was no fault of my own. Like my grandmother, who went to one of the residential schools in Spanish, she went to St. Joe's School for Girls. She moved to Toronto when she was aged out of the school. She
Right.
moved to Toronto and had a family in Toronto, like a very classic story. And that's where I grew up. But I didn't grow up disconnected. I grew up knowing exactly who we were,
Yes.
visiting my home community, like having those relationships, right? And so it's a very modern sense. And it meant that I felt, as I talk about in the first book, there would be times where I didn't know where I belonged, because it didn't feel like I belonged in the city, where people would clearly identify me as an Indigenous person, and that was
Mm-hmm.
negative. And I didn't feel at home in my community because I wasn't from there in the same way as my cousins
Oh,
who
that's
would be there
connecting.
were, right? And had a different sort of sense of it. And it was this real disconnect that I was trying to reconcile. And what happened through my experience in terms of someone making, you know, I got to be careful because people get sued, but like making, challenged claims to Indigenous belonging, I came out of it going, "Oh, I actually get it," and that's why I wanted to write the book. And I could, just recite the book to you, but this would be a very long podcast then. But I have very complex, I've pretty complex feelings in terms of, as Anishinaabe, it's my understanding that our teaching is we don't really interfere with other nations' sense of belonging. And so, in terms of
Mm-hmm.
our place to sort of police other nations, I don't think we have one as Anishinaabe.
Yeah.
And then I also think we have to maintain what is sort of our worldview as we handle this problem. Because, Kim, one of the things that I did when this happened to me is I went searching for protocol.
Ugh.
Right, I went searching for the answer. Like I talked to elders saying, like, what do we do? Like, what are, and
Right. It's
to
not something you
to an
Google.
elder,
Yeah.
it's not something you Google, and it's not something elders can guide you necessarily on, because there isn't protocol.
Yeah.
Because it's not something that we have this rich tradition of dealing with, where we've developed a process to actually do this. We haven't. So the only sort of guiding principles are things that are really intrinsic to, like, right relations, and thinking about the grandparent teachings, and some of the wisdom that comes from the clan system of
Yes.
governance,
Yes.
and like and that and so that requires a sort of, like, us trying to piece together or figure out how we actually navigate this issue. And I don't think we're there yet. I think there's some places to look. Most of them aren't a social media website. In fact, none of them are
Right.
that.
Yes.
There are other places, and I think. But to me, the most important thing was I didn't want to lose what it is to me to be Anishinaabe
Mm.
as I went through this. I didn't want to compromise. And I think fundamental to my sort of understanding of it and the way I try to embody it is that we're actually really generous, very trusting, and we're open. We move through the world like that because that's how we want other people to accept us. And that does expose us to some harm,
Mm.
but I'd rather work on how we handle that harm than closing that part of us off, me at least, off. And I'm also an artist and someone who's trying to tell stories and trying to relate the human experience to other human beings.
Right.
And I don't want to be closed off, which means I have to be, unfortunately, you have to be somewhat susceptible to harm
Well, it comes with the
if you don't want to
territory.
close yourself off.
Yeah, it comes with the territory. And also, Jesse, I'm thinking about what you're saying, and what it means to be Anishinaabe, because people often will ask you about that. And if you turn the tables on another nation and say, well, what does it mean to be, whoever you are, you'll see that it's very difficult for them to answer that other than the superficials. Well, we like bacon and, our national dish is poutine. And for us, it's more about the substance of a being, and the guidance principles are very much connected to the seven sacred teachings. And one of the profound experiences when you're asking questions is the kindness that is redirected back at us, recognizing that they'll do their best. Elders in particular will do their best to try and answer, but they do it in such a kind way that sometimes you don't get an answer, but you get the kindness and reassurance that you do belong. And the great I guess the great unknown about Indigenous people across this country is they love historic amnesia. And the narrative that's been told by colonizers is taught in school, reinforced, and people believe that to be the absolute truth when there are many ways of knowing. And that's how I started my work. And I think that the work that you do, you use this term, narrative sovereignty. And I had to read it a couple times because at first I thought it was a misspelling. I thought you were trying to say native sovereignty, but narrative sovereignty really speaks to what you're talking about right now. And it's a great term, and it's a great way of encompassing the orality of our nations. So yeah, you can't Google everything. And if you are able to Google something, who wrote it? Who put it there? Where's the authentic voice behind that? And I have I've had to get a more critical eye, I guess, when I'm recommending people to do a bit of due diligence and be prepared to engage with members of our community or with myself as a cultural consultant. But there's also the hiccup of terminologies, right? We're using Anishinaabe now as like a standard term, but in our in our government identity, we're still under the Indian Act as Indians, and then in the Constitution as First Nations, which is a great misdirection for the average Canadian. They have no idea how vast the grouping of First Nations is. And the shock on people's faces when you start going through some of the numbers, which they can digest easily, and the blankness that comes over their face, and the fact that we have different names for ourselves, just seems to shut people's brains down. They just freeze. And I love that in your work, especially in your front-facing work, you use that word a lot. You don't just go back into the kind of comfortable terms of, we keep getting renamed, but the latest term is Indigenous, but before that was Aboriginal. We have First Nations, and then we have Indians, and we have some very unkind terminologies. But it's confusing when you're trying to do research on a nation so that you can perhaps walk that path of truth and reconciliation in a meaningful way. And we're 11 years in to the release of that document. And Canada, to me, gets a failing grade. What's your thoughts?
Well, I can't disagree with that grade. And just to sort of end the previous part, it's really important for me to say Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Bear Clan, because I think if we say it and identify ourselves, and to me that is correct. Like that, and if I want to go further, I can say from Genaabaajing Anishinaabek, I can say my family's Miyawasaki. Like you can situate me very clearly, and I want that so people can situate me, because I do think that is where I am coming from when I speak, and I just think over time that will educate. They'll have to figure it out, and it's not up to me to necessarily hold their hands, but it is up to me to say these things and have them sort of work with that as the new reality. Because I think Indigenous, it's a fine catch-all for the moment, but it's not actually reflective of the true way we governed ourselves or thought of ourselves before. And I think ultimately we want to get back to that understanding of who we are and what we're doing. And so, I don't mind using Indigenous if I'm trying to capture First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. But as soon as I want to be more specific, I want to get much more specific. In
Mm-hmm.
terms of the TRC, I think there's a few things that were always going to be challenging around the TRC, and that is that and part of it is that narrative sovereignty piece, which
Mm-hmm.
I want to be clear with you, Kim, was a very strategic use of language by me, because
Right.
when I was using that term a lot, I was engaged in advocacy to try to create additional space for Indigenous people to access the narrative industry that
Yes.
exists in colonial spaces. Right? Because colonialism and its ruler, capitalism, requires the monetization of everything, sadly, including
Yes.
stories, which for Anishinaabe were not things we monetized before. But because that is the world that we are now existing in, if we are locked out, if we don't have access to those spaces, then we know what we will experience, which is people will take our stories or tell stories about us that we have no control over,
Mm-hmm.
and that those stories are very powerful. They shape the world's understanding of us, and we live now in the echoes of what that was. And so we need to live in the echoes of what it is if we tell our own story. So I really use the term narrative sovereignty because I knew, I was going to say I felt, but no, I knew that it would be understood by the non-Indigenous people that I was advocating to, that they would understand what I meant by narrative sovereignty in a way that would be undeniable because it's something they claim for themselves all the time, and yet they have denied us in their systems. And so when you are able to use language that says, no, look, this is something you clearly have and that you fund for you, and yet clearly I can point to legislation that has legally denied it to us,
Mm.
it becomes a hard argument for them to say no. And I like, certainly in my advocacy work when it's dealing with the colonial government, my goal always is to put them in a position where they cannot say no to what we are saying. And that requires language, logic, some history, some law, like a whole bunch of different things that you try to wield in order to make it undeniable, because the truth of our relationship with colonial governments is if we make it deniable in any way, they will deny.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's easy.
so and I even understand that this is all a cruel game because we shouldn't be asking for what should be rightfully ours from these people, but we need to get in a position where this is a long-term thing that we're fighting to get out from underneath. And
Mm-hmm.
so we need to raise the blanket to let the fresh air in. And you take those opportunities to raise the blanket, knowing that the more you can get at those gaps, it'll be easier to one day flip it, the whole thing off of us. And so, yeah, that was really just a strategic thing. And what I would say in terms of principles of it, I think for Indigenous people, it's better to understand it as narrative self-determination, which is not as sexy a phrase as narrative sovereignty. It doesn't roll off the English tongue, Kim, like narrative sovereignty does. But I think it's more accurate because it means that we just get to decide how our story and who our story and what our story is, and we get to tell it. And the sort of how we choose to do that is really not as important. And so that includes if we need to involve non-Indigenous people, that's fine. But it's really about us having the agency to decide how that works and not having that imposed, which was very much what the system was sort of beforehand. So anyway, I think part of the issue with truth and reconciliation is because we haven't had narrative sovereignty, the story of why we even had the TRC is actually not known to Canadians, right? Like most Canadians, I would guess, think
Yes.
that we had the TRC because the government wanted it to happen, which is just fundamentally untrue, right? There was a lawsuit. That's why we had the TRC. And it was an enormous lawsuit that the survivors were going to win and did win, right? And if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have had it. And I think that framing is important because it tells Canadians that the truth and reconciliation is something the government will be dragged to, not something that they will just do. And if Canadians want it, which I think they should, maybe now more than ever because they're facing their own colonial threats from the empire to the south, south of the medicine line from us.
Mm.
That I would argue for them that actually their pathway to the greatest sense of resistance to that colonial threat is to reconcile their own colonial history and to do it quickly. Because the strength of this nation, the so-called Canada, of what it could be if it actually had First Nations people on board, which it's never had, ever. But I think it could if it were to actually do the reconciliation thing and accept the truth and make amends for what the harm's done and actually move forward in a true right relations framework, then I think actually would be far more resistant to the anxiety and the threat that is facing south of the border if it were to do this. And conveniently, it would also forge a new sense of Canadian belonging for the country that it hasn't had, I would suggest, ever, because it would have accomplished something that no other colonial state has done, which is to truly reconcile and grapple with its own origin story and to admit what that story is and to accept that that's what that story is as part of its own healing, right? I think part of the issue is that Canada and Canadians don't realize that the TRC and the Truth and Reconciliation process is an offering of healing to them from us. And it's not actually our healing, right? Our healing is already happening and was happening before the TRC and will continue whether Canada heals or not. Right? Like that's just what's going to happen. The offering the TRC is for them to heal themselves, and part of the way they heal themselves is by helping us heal, by being part of our healing process, as opposed to being part of what we are healing from.
Right.
And in that they would heal themselves and be able to finally have, because Canada is a very anxious nation about its sovereignty because I think it deep down knows there's not a great argument for it. Right, from a legal or any moral, any sort of basis. And yet the way to achieve Canadian sovereignty has always been, from the time the very first boat arrived here, was through First Nations people. It was always that way. And we haven't done that here, but we could, right? And I think I would urge Canada, I think we had an opportunity for Canadians at 150, but I would actually urge Canadians to watch to the south right now, because that place is about to go through its 250th. And I'd urge Canadians to watch, because I don't think it's going to be fun.
Yeah, I agree.
And I would say that watch, because that is a country that can't do what I think Canada could do if it really wanted to, which is to actually do the business of reconciliation, of truth and reconciliation. And it would get us so that we don't have to be where they are in 100 years from now. And it should tell us that we could end up there, that Canada could be where they are if you don't actually do this sort of work. So I think there's a lot of barriers that were always there, Kim.
Yeah.
But I think there's also, I think Canada, undeniable for sure, but I think also undeniable is that because of the nature of Canada, right, it's a very large place with a very small population. It's incredibly wealthy because of that. Like Canada thinks itself poor. It's not. It's Anishinaabe have always known this. This is a place of plenty. Yes. This is a place of extraordinary abundance.
Enough. Yeah.
So that is just true of this place.
Yeah.
And because of that, I think it could reconcile in a way that other nations would struggle because it's not resource poor. It could give back huge amounts of land to Indigenous control, and it would not affect anyone but resource companies who we should probably be not doing business with anyway.
Anyways,
I agree. It would just not. Yeah.
That'd be a game changer.
Like I think there's just so much we could do.
I think
it would make this country a country.
Yeah, oh my gosh, that's such a powerful statement, because we do have a small population and we do have a vast land base, and we know that south of the border they're peeking at us, trying to embrace us as the 51st state nonsense. And when land belongs to Indigenous people and it's enshrined, in the, in legal documentation. Why aren't we getting some of that back? And why is that concept seen as such a threat in this country? I know when I first heard about the discovery of the children's bodies, mass burials in hidden places, I thought, the churches were quick to step forward and apologize. Well, maybe not quick or quick enough, but there were some kind of apologies offered that I didn't feel good about it, but I also felt it didn't come across as absolutely sincere. And I said, if to me, in my mind, if they wanted to really walk their talk, give back some of the land that churches own. They own a vast amount of land here in this country,
Mm-hmm.
and they could give back some of that land for a true restitution and really walking their talk when it comes to an apology. But that didn't happen.
I think they should give it all back. Like, I just think that should be something, and I think it should be something Canadians should agree that that's what should happen. And that, like, it should be something where the government, like, I've never understood why the government of Canada isn't requesting the stuff back because in theory, aren't we now citizens? And so then should the government not behave like, should they not act on our behalf? In which case, we've been harmed by foreign entities.
Yep.
They should be,
and we're not just
working
citizens.
for that
we are sovereign
restitution.
Citizens in this country.
Well, I mean, regardless, like however the colonial state wants to see me, they have, like, in theory, I vote in their elections, and that makes me an equal part of their nation. And so, work on our behalf as well. And I do give a lot of talks and a lot of speeches and talk to lots of important, powerful people, and not quote unquote, I just like to talk to people.
Yes.
And I like to leave them with the idea of, like, I want you to imagine what it would be, what we could accomplish if we were actually aligned. Because I think people think that's a faraway dream, and I just don't think it is. Like, I think that there's a benefit, at least from an Anishinaabe perspective, in that, like, when I think of my great-grandparents, right, because my community is a Robinson Huron Treaty community, so that predates Canada.
Yeah, mine too.
And when I think of what they were when they were thinking about Canada or this place, or what it would mean to, like, share this place, they didn't see it necessarily as a threatening, that it had to mean dominion or a loss of anything. And I still think that dream of what this place could be is attainable, where I can still be Anishinaabe and live in my life as Anishinaabe, but that we have a relationship with these people who are now here that is mutually beneficial. And, I'm a firm believer that I think the Anishinaabe Nation will be reconstituted. We will be a nation as we were again. Anishinaabe law will be the law of our lands again. And that will require us to think about how we onboard all these other folks. Because I'm not imagining a future where they're leaving. I'm imagining a future where they might also be citizens of our nation, right? And they would understand what that would mean for them to have that, right? Because we have laws, we've always had laws that governed how we understood and how we behaved, and we could have other people live under those laws and adhere to them. And that would require a different relationship with the land and each other and how we think about resource allocation and all these sorts of things. And I think that's still what we will end up. I think there's prophecy that suggests that we will end up there. I think that prophecy is turning out scarily prescient and should be taken rather seriously. And I think that we just have to, in our lifetimes, in our time in this sort of part of being, when we're in this body here, we just have to make sure we're doing as best we can to put in the places where that can be the eventual outcome. And so I certainly view my work as, like, my work's been mostly around our stories and the space for our stories, because I think we don't get the other stuff if we aren't able to first command our stories so that people can understand us appropriately and understand what that would actually look like from our perspective. Because I think it's also about, ideally through truth and reconciliation, if we were to do it, what Canadians would actually understand is a different way to understand the world. And that if they truly understand how an Anishinaabe person looks and understands this place, it's so fundamentally different. Like to truly understand that the tree that I can see from where I sit is my relative.
Yes.
That's not a tree. That's my family right there. Right? That when I step out of my house, I'm already in the ensconce of family all around me. And if you were to really understand that we could move this place to a different spot, and we would be so, like, such of the other forces in the world could be dealt with so differently if we were to actually embody what I would describe as sort of the fundamental reality of humanness, right? And I think one of the things colonialism has done and continues to do is distance us from the humility to embrace what it is to be truly human.
Yeah. I think, that distinctly different way of knowing is also seen as a threat to the economy of this country because it's based on resource extraction. And you spoke about the wealth here and the way they go about that would have to fundamentally change to have a meaningful relation or improved Indigenous relations with us, because that's the topic of conversation anytime we come together. The impacts of that are horrific for our communities. I cannot believe it's 2026 and so many communities still don't have access to just water they can drink, water they can bathe in, water they can cook with and know that it's safe. So I think in my living lifetime, I would like to see some of just the basic human needs improved. But I would love to get to a point in this country where we're not seen as a threat no matter what we say. And I also think it's our voice who needs to speak for us first. We're still here. And the ethics and the responsibility for us internally to care for ourselves means we need to externally express what those needs are instead of being told what needs may be addressed or what other people think our needs are. And I saw that, in the release of the TRC report, instead of just reading the 94 calls to action, this beautiful gift to help guide you so you don't have to reinvent the wheel or make up any more nonsense. Follow this path and some changes can begin. I'm not seeing that. And, I want to have what would you say, like a little flame of hope moving forward. I'm not getting
Mm.
any younger, neither are you. We've certainly endured our share of struggle, and belonging is something that is a basic need for everybody. And I'm listening to what you're saying, and my brain's going off in lots of different directions. And I'm wondering if maybe as we move forward and more of us come to more of a public stage to speak what is in our hearts, what our teachings are, what our way of life is, and why this is important. It might soften the fear and make it more digestible for those who are trying or say they're trying to understand. But I think when it comes to government relations, that colonial structure is so rigid, it has no flexibility. And so we would have to bring our own way, our own governance system into practice to truly honor who we are and represent our people.
Yeah, I think that's all true. And I think that's sort of what we work for. And I think that's how we should be viewing the decisions we make, even around like belonging. We should be having a really long view in terms of what we want out of those discussions and how we approach even the most difficult and hard things right now around belonging and false claims and all this stuff. Is the view should really be, well, how do we handle this issue with the idea that the Anishinaabe Nation will be reconstituted, like that's where we're going, that our laws can come back and that we can have a greater say. How do we want to actually uh, do that? And I think that storytelling is part of where we will convince or help the people to see what that could
Yeah,
ultimately
powerful tool.
be.
Yes.
And so that I think, that's sort of where I the story I often say is like, because I think this is more understandable to people, is like the first time I ever saw an iPad, right, was on a episode of Star Trek from 1966.
Oh,
And, the person who wrote that episode, who was a woman actually, she didn't know how to make an iPad. Like, she didn't know how you would do that in terms of like create something that could do all the things the iPad did on that episode. Um, but in telling the story of something that didn't exist but could, that might in one day in the future, that story was watched by people who, it turns out, did know how to make an iPad. And so that little story of, well, this could be something we have in the future is now something that we all have, or like a lot of us have,
yeah.
right? Is an iPad or a phone or a
Great
computer. Like,
analogy.
how, yeah. And I think so when it comes to things that aren't technology, because like, the iPad's all great and everything, but it's, I think, small potatoes in terms of what I'm interested in, which is like I think we can seed the storytelling world with different versions of how to be and what the future looks like that start to lift us out of, because I think one of the challenges we face is that our imaginations, our dreams, have been really limited by colonial thinking and colonial conditioning, so that so many of the futures we imagine are really restricted by the same rules that govern us right now. Like, so many of the futures are capitalist and like, have all these sorts of systems still in place. And I want us to imagine that we can start to dream about when those are not true. Like when we can truly think about outside of the systems and the way we currently exist to different forms. And to me, the best way for the broader population to do that is to allow storytellers who maybe their memory, their blood memory of being like that is more recent.
Ugh, I love
And
that
that's
memory.
Indigenous people. Like we have a sense, because frankly, if you go up to my community and talk to some of my cousins, they still, they're trying to live as close to a traditional way as we can.
In a
And
modern
so it's like,
age.
well, yeah, we sort of remember. Yeah, we sort of remember. I think our communities actually remember what it was before
Yeah.
this. And that's a superpower right now, is just the ability to go, oh, no, there's actually like this that we're living in isn't real. There's a whole other way, a whole other thing that isn't this. And the tension in Canada, I would say, throughout its entire history, is that tension, is the tension between this reality, the colonial reality, which is an imposition, and another reality, which exists currently underneath that one, which is the reality that existed before that one was overlaid it, that blanket I referred to earlier. That is colonialism, that we have to sort of prop the edges up before we can flip it all the way off. That blanket conceals a different truth. And it's a universal truth about that these systems that we have become beholden to are not the mountain or the stream. They're fake. They're not real in the way that the tree is, or the lake. Anishinaabe, we always refer to the water, right? When we're talking about ourselves and our communities. Like if you go stand, if you go stand, right, Kim, like on the North Shore Lake Huron where my community is.
Yeah, I've been there.
I would urge any Canadian, go stand and look out and tell me that anything is more real than that lake in that moment. That anything any human has conjured in their brain is somehow real compared to that lake, which has seen so much in its life, so much more than we could possibly, us as little animals, could possibly understand, right? Like that's why we should be beholden. The lake, I look out on that. I live in Toronto. I can go down to the Lake Ontario. It's not quite as big, but it's a similar vibe. I go look out and go, it's ridiculous for me to think that like taxes or anything that is involved, and I pay my taxes. I don't want listeners to get me wrong. I'm just saying that it's to me, the truth lies in that water, lies in the mountain, in a way that anything humans create just can't match, because it's ephemeral. It's gone. in an instant, like us. Whereas the mountain has seen so much more than we ever will. It has known and knows so much, and we should be always thinking about us in relation to that. And I think that we can move to where that tension between the sort of reality or this version of it that we now exist in versus the one that we can remember, I think we can get to the place where that tension starts to reverse, and we start to, and maybe one day, here's my real dream, Kim, maybe one day my great grandchildren or whatever version, they will stare at the water, and what will be a distant memory for them is this reality, is this, is the idea that everything's a commodity. They'll think there's something, I remember something that sometimes some ancient people who were backwards thought that all of this should be something we charge for, should be something that we need to make this weird paper thing out of trees, no less. That we have to turn trees into paper as if that's the real thing, right? Like, and I hope that in fact that'll just be something they go, yeah, I remember something about that. The old ones telling stories, but we don't have to worry because we're here and now. That's the story of Canada's future I want to tell. And that story's not one where it's just Indigenous people. It's a whole new understanding of the relationship we could have. And again, in terms of global stuff, we need countries to do that. And we need them, maybe, listen, some countries have done it, like Haiti, and they get brutally punished for it. But I think a place like Canada, because it's now coded as like white or whatever, could maybe do it, and it would be seen as more an example. And I just wish we dreamt big like that. I also just think our dreams get too confined into small spaces, and I don't want to dream small. I want to dream the biggest things possible for us.
I love the idea of dreaming, and I think some of what you're speaking about, is already available to Canadians at large to process through our creation story and the relations we have with the different orders of creation. And so this is why we stand up for the rights of a tree, or the digging in the ground that would disrupt the most ancient relatives, the little ones that become the great mountains. And I'm struggling a little bit here how to articulate this, but I'm still in my public speaking asked, how big is my teepee? Did I ride my horse in today? And the small mindedness of what Indigenous people are is still very much Hollywood and not reality based. And we know that city environments are not reality based. These are human constructed. They are an imposition on the land. They do not live in harmony with the land. The end result is gatherings of great numbers that deplete the spaces and places and cause harm long term. And in our visioning, we know this is embraced in an Anishinaabe cultural value and teaching, that we do need to look 7 generations ahead and look 7 generations behind us. And there's different ways of approaching that. Some look 3 generations behind, and then we're in the middle, and then we look 3 generations ahead. However you choose to look at that teaching, the fact is we're not just thinking about immediate gratification. And in city limits, we're surrounded by that. And people support that and they encourage that. But in our Anishinaabe world, we have patience. And one of the things that you've stated publicly many times is people need to listen. But who are those people? Who should be listening? Who do you think should be listening?
Well,
we could say all Canadians should listen, but that's not happening. I mean, we just need to look out west in the drama that's happening out there. We need to, look south of the border where our relatives are there, and they're trying to have people listen. But how do we get around to the point where we're listening to each other, not just listening, but listening as equals?
Yeah, I think I think ideally everyone would listen, but I think that's probably not possible. And I think that I want to be really generous and understanding that some people are in a place where it's hard to hear. They're so buried by these things that it can be hard to hear through that much earth. Um, and I get it, because their ears are also filled, Kim, with mistruths
Yes.
and other stories, right?
Yes.
That
Yes.
that that block out. And some of those truths are hard. Like, I think part of the challenge with listening is that you don't always hear things you want to hear.
Yes, of
Sometimes you
course.
hear things that are difficult to sit with. And I say that even for me, right? Like, it can be hard to hear things and sit with them. And I don't think we're in a world where being able to like take the time to process is not only like sort of rhythmically impossible, because just the nature of the speed of this time, but also we've been conditioned like that. That's not a thing you do, right? When if you sink into like our way of seeing, oh, that's exactly what you do, right? Like decisions of any magnitude take time, like take real
And lots
time
of
to think
listening.
really deeply. Lots of listening and going, and through the clan system, you go back and forth. Like, there's lots of listening to what
Lots.
everyone sort of thinks. And I know in my leadership roles, that's sort of how I've approached them. Is like, I do when I was chair or whatever in these sorts of colonial positions, I was always like, yeah, for me, the prerogative of the chair is to listen, not to talk. Like, I would always say to my board, it's like, I want to speak the least, because I want to listen. And when I speak, I want it to be only when it's so necessary, because someone else hasn't said something that needs to be said. And like, because I think that's a better way to sort of understand where everyone is and move. But it's not necessarily the way we're sort of all taught. So I want to be generous that some people are just in a place where hearing is difficult. I've definitely done in my career where like it's pretty targeted. Like, I want, these days, Kim, I do a lot of talking to school boards,
Yes.
because like
And
my
people,
thinking is I want the change to occur in the next generations, right? That maybe our generation, my generation, I don't want to say is lost, but is, we didn't do the thing. So why not speak to folks who can be in a different position to sort of think about these things? And I find a lot of hope there. Like,
me
we
too.
talked, you mentioned hope.
Me too.
I find a lot of hope in young people, because they're coming with more knowledge about this than my generation was to sit in the circle, right? And I think that's good, because maybe they can have different conversations and actually move us to a different space. But I do pretty targeted, and obviously for a long time in my career, I wanted to speak to really powerful people to try to
Make
move.
change. Yeah.
And I think, yeah, and I think there was some success there, right? And it's and I would say, the way I would view myself in all of this, which is I try to do very humbly, but I would say I was sort of like, my origin story as like an Anishinaabe kid who's born in the city and all that sort of stuff, went to a private school because my dad's stepdad was rich, right? So I had this sort of proximity to like white privilege. Um, like, in some ways I would look at that and go, I was sort of made to be in the rooms I ended up being,
Yeah.
because
Agreed.
I could wear the suit like they like, and feel comfortable in the suit that made them feel comfortable. But then I would say things that would make them uncomfortable. And to me, that was the role, right? Was sort of like put on their costume in a weird way. Actually, I haven't thought about it in this weird way. But you know how so many of the folks who claim to be us, but it turns out maybe not so much, a lot of them dress the part, which I
Yes.
find interesting.
Yeah.
Because like, I don't know if I've ever been in buckskin in my life, Kim. Like, I'm probably more comfortable in Italian wool than I am in buckskin. But what I would say is, like, I think I get why my ancestors might have thought that was good, was to have, because I absolutely ascribe where I am to my ancestors, that they had foresight in terms of understanding that this was an outcome that would happen, and that they sort of saw it like, yeah, we might need a descendant to wear their suits and sit in their rooms and then disrupt them, like to wear a disguise to get into those rooms,
Mm-hmm.
to look like, to sort of have the same speech because I went to their fancy school, to have like all that sort of thing, but then sit in there and be an Anishinaabe. And if you know what that means, well, I know any Anishinaabe, like when
Body,
we're in
mind,
those
spirit.
rooms, then we do the thing where we say the thing
Yeah.
because we're the people that say the thing. And I really felt that, right? But what I found over time is that there was a conflict within me around some of that. And because I always resisted the notion of two-eyed seeing, which I understand why we talked about that. But for me, it always felt a little bit like I can't really see the world. I can wear the costume, Kim, but I
Mm-hmm.
can't see the world as they do.
Well,
It's
yeah.
come to, and in fact, that really was a conflict for me for a long time. And now I'm much more accepting. This is why I say I'm much more accepting my belonging, because I realize I actually only see the world as an Anishinaabe guy. I don't have the seeing to be able to see as they do. I can put on colonial glasses as my joke. That interestingly the Indian Act paid for, so they're truly colonial glasses, and I can put those on my prescription lenses, and I can sort of see the Matrix, and it's sort of like Clark Kent, like I can put it on, not that I'm Superman, but I can put it on and fit in their world
Yes.
and like do that, but then I take them off, and then I'm not there anymore. I don't see the code. I don't see that. I see my relative out the window blowing in the breeze. I can't. So, yeah, I would just. I think that it's. I've spoken to a lot of people. Ultimately, my career is mostly about talking to people, whether on the radio or in my books or in person. And I've tried to be really broad in terms of who I try to reach, because I think it's,
Me
I want
too.
everyone would be a good marker. But there's times when absolutely I've wanted to be in specific rooms to say specific things, to achieve specific results. And sadly, we need that. Like I wish I could tell other First Nations people that you don't have to do that. Some of us do, and I can't tell you it's fun, and I can't tell you you'll feel great all the time that you're doing it, and that it won't hurt you. It will hurt you,
Mm-hmm.
but it is some of our roles, I think, especially for some of us who can exist. I don't want to say easily, but maybe more easily in those spaces. And when you can do that, it's your obligation to disrupt, because just because I can get in that room, I I I wanted you to be there, Kim. I wanted all my cousins. I wanted my grandma. I wanted
Mm-hmm.
everyone. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted I wanted my relation, the tree,
Yeah.
as well.
Not enough seats at the
To be
table for
honest,
that,
I
though.
wanted them in that room.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted them at the room too. I do want that, and so it's like, how do I do that? And sometimes it's being someone who, you know, puts on the suit and goes into that room and then makes everyone uncomfortable that you're in that room. And that isn't always a comfortable place to be, but I think it's something that we have to do right now in this time. We won't have to do it in the future, but right now it's something we sort of have to deal with, like so many things, including where we started this conversation about belonging and
Right.
those sorts of issues.
I, I,
We
I,
have to deal with them right now, but it doesn't mean we will always deal with them.
I like that flame of hope final statement that it won't always be. When I think about there's this big dialogue going on, especially in academic realms, about decolonizing, and my disruption or pushback is this is a colonial construct. You can't deconstruct it to bridge Indigenous ways of knowing with colonial constructs. They're not the same. Uh, what happens in that when people try to do that, what I have found in my experience is there's a dilution And usually the dilution's heavy on the Indigenous side because we don't want people to feel uncomfortable, and they're not able to listen if we make them
Mm,
feel uncomfortable. And we don't want to be the disruptor,
mm,
otherwise we're not invited back to the table again. And if we speak the truth, we also have to give a whole education behind it so they can understand what that truth is. And so when I went to
mm,
university, I got really disillusioned. It was the first time I'd heard about residential school, and it was told to me by, and no disrespect to anybody, but by a white TA. They were not Indigenous, and the way that it was shared, I, I felt like a puddle. I just emotionally, internally combusted, and I had to leave the class, and I was outraged. Like, they don't have the right to tell me about this. It needs to be my people telling me this. And I had a very, emotional reaction to that. And, subsequent that I've had to work on why I had such a reaction, because I, like you, I want to speak to the world, and there's room for lots of our voices. And it also reminds them that there's great diversity amongst us. And while it is a disruption, you can use other words, but it's the truth ultimately. We're just telling the
mm,
truth. And the truth is not uh, uh, a story. So when we talk about telling our stories, the truth sometimes gets degraded, and people think, well, that's just a story. The facts are, and then they'll revert to a colonial narrative, and it's frustrating for me. But how do you think we can actually root our stories beyond the usage of all of the different ways? We've got television, we've got podcasts, we've got radio, we've got um, uh, AI. We've got all kinds of things now that are supposedly helping us to tell our stories. And yet, when they're out there and they've been out there for a while, they get co opted and they get degraded again. And so people are always reverting back to what's comfortable rather than what is truth.
mm. Yeah, I don't disagree with that,
Mm.
but I think we only need to look to the fact that the sort of the myth of Canada and the U.S., like how they were formed and all of those, like those are pretty seeded stories, like in terms of like people sort of accept them.
Well, I think they're
And I would say
rooted
the only reason that happened, well, they're rooted. And how did they get rooted?
from
Is
those
they were
seeds.
just told over and over and over again.
Yeah. Repetition, repetition.
Yeah, and so I think unfortunately we have to just keep telling them like over and over and over again.
That's been my strategy
Excuse
to
me.
date.
And it's not, and I think it's a fair strategy. Um, but I would also say that I acknowledge, most of my career was about trying to gain access to colonial systems of storytelling for us, which I think is valuable, and we need to do that.
Agreed.
I would also say though that we are getting to a place. I don't think we were always there, because again, our communities have definitely healed themselves a lot in my lifetime, and so I think we're getting to a place where we can start to think more about how we build systems of storytelling, knowledge, information, knowledge sharing, knowledge transfer, however we want to think about it, within ourselves, within our own communities, right? Like to start to think about what it would be to build. Like I've always imagined, like what would it be to have like an interconnected, the way to describe it maybe in the language of the moment is like a intraweb, like an internet, but not one that's sort of accessible from the outside of it, that
Mm.
exists, say, between, like I was always thinking, like, what if Serpent River and Sagamuk, which is like where, I have family in both, and like, what if they, and like all these sort of nations, like, what if we had this thing where, like, say, language revitalization was actually just centered in this sort of intraweb or intranet, where we can share resources, but it's not really, it's not visible to as anyone outside of our
Mm.
communities. It's just for us. And we use that as to sort of start rebuilding some of the storytelling networks and
And
sharing and
communities.
information sharing
Mm-hmm.
and communities that we used to have using like some modern technology. But I would also say probably always with the guise of like, well, let's start with the technology, but see if we can get back to a more in-person, sort of way. because for all sorts of reasons. But like, I just think that would be wise. But start to utilize some of the tools, less about gaining access to their systems and more about creating our own or recreating some of our own in a more modern context. And certainly with like Robinson here on treaty money and like all of these sorts of finally coming back to our communities where we have this opportunity for investment into long-term projects, I would love to see some of our communities go, you know what, let's like, here's a total fantasy, Kim, but like when I think of like colonial inventions,
Yes.
when I think of like colonial inventions that we might like, and I don't think there's a lot, but this one I often name, which is like the library.
Ugh.
Okay? Because I think of all sort of colonial things. Well, the library could sort of be Anishinaabe, like in terms of it's meant to be a house of information and knowledge, but there's no barrier to entry.
Yes.
Like you don't have to be anything. Like you can just go there and get it.
Go.
And it doesn't cost you anything. Like, and it's just there and it's curated. So there's like people to help guide you, but it's not, do you know what I mean? Like,
I do.
So when I think of like these institutions, I look at the library and I go, we might have thought of that. Like that, like if we had thought of writing shit down, like if we had thought at all like that was somehow going to be important, which again, we may decide we don't need to do that again. But like, if we had ever thought, we should collect this sort of stuff, the library might be the sort of thing we would have thought of, is like, this is a low barrier, no entry, anyone can just do it, and it's just here, sort of thing. And so, like, I think, could we not, like our nations with all these resources from these treaties that were broken all these years ago, think about like, well, what would it be for us to actually have an Anishinaabe library, or like a place where we gather our knowledge and it's accessible to us.
It's a great dream.
And we begin to like build, what does that look? Yeah. And what does that look like? And how would that shape root? And I would argue we sort of build it with, we build it with the purpose being, it is for us. Mm-hmm. It's not about how we navigate their world. This is a part of us rebuilding ours.
We already have that in place, though, Jesse. When you think about the living library of elders and elder wisdom, knowledge, and teachings, it's there.
That's a great way to think about it. That's a great way to think about it, Kim. Yeah, I think that's. But my urge is always like, I want, and maybe this is the modernist or whatever, my colonial teaching, like. Yes, but I sort of want it more. But maybe that's the teaching, is that it shouldn't be that accessible. There needs to be some effort. So that's a good way to think about it. But yeah, I want to take that one away, Kim, and think about that, because maybe that changed my vision when we think about it that way.
Yeah, I come at it always from a cultural perspective. I'm an ancestral knowledge keeper, and I'm often asked to speak about our way of life and our teachings, and the kind of vampiric approach to try and milk me, by writing down all notes and then making some sort of a document about it, or writing a story about it. And now now they're speaking about this. I challenge that. I also get offended by that, because I always preface my talks with, I'm sharing this with you, I'm not giving it to you. And, it's only an Indigenous ceremony if it's led by us, not by somebody who likes us and considers themselves a good ally and has sat a long time and does know it. You don't have the right. So the living library aspect, it also has a bit of a weakness in that when that living library passes on, so does much of what travels with them, if they haven't been able to deposit it into a helper, shkbewis. And, I think that the power of orality supersedes every other type of communication, because it comes with the spirit of blood memory. It comes with the spirit of our relations, above, below, and within. It is incredibly complex and beautiful, but it's also powerful in that the way that people can listen is with their whole body, with their whole mind, with their whole spirit, whether
Mm.
they recognize it or not. So it brings into play the conscious, the semi-conscious, and the kind of conscious way that we engage. And people think that they're conscious, but they're really not. They're always in the past because this is what they've learned. So this is their truth. And so this is where they come from. And when we come to the table, we're coming from the now. Our language is in the now. Our teachings are about the now, even though they're thousands and thousands of years old. So the ability for us to progress has been demonstrated. The ability of Canada and the colonial construct does not have the ability to evolve. Right? That's why we're still in the same system that's over 150 years old. So I'm going to close with that because I think we can go down a rabbit hole and
No, I think you nailed it.
there's so much to discuss about this, and it's something I'm very passionate about, as are you. And there's so many of us. And when I first started speaking, I was constantly questioned, well, what's your title? What's your title? And I was always reluctant to give a title because it comes from a colonial language, which is a misinterpretation and often a degradation of how you're seen within community internally, and externally doesn't match up. So you can see it in the terms we use, like, oh, that's an auntie. Now, it may not be biological, but that is still an auntie, or that's an uncle, or that's a grandmother, or that's an elder. The terminologies, the way we use them internally, we have to explain it to external realms all the time. And I would like to be introduced like that, but they don't understand that, even the basics. When it comes to your sense of identity and how, and the control of that, how that gets placed out into the world. But this has been a beautiful conversation.
Well,
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much, Kim. I really appreciate those last points, the living library. I think that's really wonderful and has really helped inform my thinking. And so I really appreciate that. And I will be more conscious. I'm less, how would I put it? I sort of have accepted that people are going to take my words and do it sort of what they want with them. And there's, like, I got called a few years ago, there's professors in Australia writing a whole textbook about narrative sovereignty based on my words. And I was like, yeah, great. I don't want to be involved. So good luck with that. But maybe I should be more conscious in terms of those gifts, and then not and more sharing as opposed to gifting of things. So I appreciate that perspective, and that's really great.
Thank you. I have come to really live that as a truth when I first began my journey of really living it as a contemporary Anishinaabeg, an Ojibwe and Potawatomi woman in a country that can't even say those words. I had to. I don't know. I haven't accepted, and I haven't found the peace in the way that you have, and so I'm the one like you who does come in sometimes, and I say challenge, but you say disrupt, and it's just words, but the outcome is the same.
Yeah, and when it even comes to those things, like, those are things people call me. I don't know that I would refer to myself as any of those things. Like, nah, I mean, I think from their perspective that's probably true, but I don't, like, it's weird to say, but it's both my intent, but also not my intent. Like, I'm just there saying true things.
Yeah.
If they're disruptive, I don't think that's my fault. Like, that's just,
it's not about the blame,
a natural outcome. So yeah, and I'm not. I've really. I've gotten comfortable with the idea that it's not my role to make everyone else comfortable with me or some of the things that I'm saying, and that's all right. And so, and all the other titles, chair, CEO, like, all those titles,
I know,
those are, like, again, those are things given to me, and I don't. I've really grown to understand that there's me, the being, and then there's the things I've done, and they really prize the things I've done, and that's fine. They're gonna give me lots of awards, and like that's great, sure, whatever. But for me, it's the being. The biggest struggle, or not the struggle, but the thing I've been most working out is being able to accept myself and accept that, like, this is it, and that there's a real humility to, and I think this is foundational to Anishinaabe understanding, like there's a real humility to being human, because we are just fragile. We're not the great being. We are just this sort of thing, this naked animal trying to largely defenseless sort of navigate this world, and that the most human thing about us is our stories, and the stories that we tell to each other and to ourselves and about ourselves. And so I'm really just trying to embody that, and I want to thank you so much for letting me do that on this show. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great rest of your day and rest of your week.
I'm not letting you go yet.
Okay, don't let me go yet.
I'm not going to let you go yet. But just to add to what you just said, because I think it's really important. The word that we use to describe ourselves, Anishinaabe, that is a story. It can be translated into many, many understandings, from whence lowered, water being, good being. But the word being is there. So the emphasis you have on you are a being is as true in the Anishinaabe realm as it is outside of that. It's a powerful statement. And even though, identity is not as comfortable to you as belonging, they go hand in hand with that self-identification, with that statement, with that introduction, with that rooting in to how I will be addressed. I am Anishinaabe. And I love that. So I want to thank our ancestors, for giving us the legacy of truth through what we call ourselves. And I want all listeners to get comfortable with saying those words. But I always like to close up with something a little fun, because we did a really deep dive. And I have, from the beginning of starting this podcast, said, I'm going to do some RFQs. And my friend said, request for quotes? Why? And I go, no. It's not request for quotes. It's rapid fire questions. And they're just short things. Rapid fire questions.
Yep.
This is the realm of acronyms, right? You can get lost. But this just lets or reminds listeners that you're human. You are a being. And so I just want to run a couple things by you. And just off the top of your head, don't deep dive, don't overthink it. They're not judging. It's just a bit of who Jesse is. So, first question. What is your favorite form of inspiration?
Oh, my favorite form of inspiration.
No overthinking. Dreams. I love that too. I do that too. What sound should replace the Hollywood war whoop?
The Hollywood war whoop?
Yeah.
Indigenous aunties laughing.
I love that. Aunties laughing. That's such a great and unexpected response. Okay, next one.
It's the greatest sound in the world. Greatest sound in the world.
It is when we all get together. Oh my gosh, those belly laughs.
Okay. I love it. I could bathe in it. It's my favorite.
Okay, I'll record aunties laughing and send it to you. Okay, next question. Is this country ready for an Indigenous prime minister?
No.
Agreed. Last one. I know you love golf, but what else do you love outside of your family and work?
And I can't say golf?
You can't say golf?
Storytelling.
Awesome. That's amazing. And those are the end of the questions. So how can listeners continue to follow you? Can you, share where to find you if people want to hear more from Jesse? You on Instagram,
Well, I try to
Facebook?
stay pretty hidden, Kim.
Do you?
But yeah, I fail at it. But these days I try to be pretty quiet. They can definitely, if they want, they can find me on Facebook and Instagram. I can't promise I'm there that much,
Right.
but I still have those accounts, so they like Instagram. You're mostly going to see my dog and golf probably,
There you
and
go. Two
on
loves.
Facebook you'll mostly see nothing, and then occasionally I'll make a political statement that'll go viral, and I leave it at that. So that's my Facebook. I have a website which is just my name, jessewente.ca. You can that is occasionally updated by me and occasionally not. You can find some information. Yeah, you can find some things there.
Yeah.
And then I have an office at the Toronto Metropolitan University down in the campus in the Sagajaway Indigenous Creative Hub, and people can certainly find me there.
In person.
I'm not on campus full time, I guess, if they can figure out how to get in the building. But I'm certainly there, and otherwise I'm out and about. I'm doing a lot of like talking and appearing and stuff, and writing. There's lots of my kids' book just came out in November, Danger Eagle.
Danger Eagle.
So they could read that. But I think I was in, how many books was I in last year? I'm gonna go count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think last year. So you could do any of that and find it. And there will be a new book, a new memoir that speaks to a lot of what you and I have spoken about today, Kim.
You can quote me.
I don't think I'm allowed to say the title or anything about it yet. Other than, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this. I'm pretty sure it'll be out in September. So look for that.
Book launch.
And otherwise, hopefully you'll see me around, and if go golfing, because goodness knows I play a lot of golf, so you never know when you might be paired with me on the course.
I don't golf, but I'm happy to drive this golf cart for you. It's been a pleasure. It's truly been inspirational. You are a mentor, but you're also a relative, and I thank you for the humble nature of this dialogue, but also the truth rooting. You are a truth talker and a truth walker. I want to wish you good health, peace of mind, and good long life, always and always. And thank you so much for giving me so much time to, explore our world and our way of life. And hopefully the listeners are inspired by that as well. Thank you, Jesse.
Miigwech, Kim. Thank you so much.
Miigwech, Bamampi. So, listeners, I want to thank you for taking this journey with us today. And I encourage you to follow Jesse and put his books on your must-read list. This is not it. He's got more coming, and I'm looking forward to the new reads. They are widely accessible. They're not hard to find. And the first book that we were referencing a lot in this conversation was called Unreconciled, Family Truth and Indigenous Resistance. And of course, his new children's book, Danger Eagle. Be sure to pick up your copy today, gift it to somebody, talk about it, generate conversations, and maybe change the way you're thinking about Indigenous relations. Jesse, be well. Look forward to our paths intersecting again. You are free to go. This show would not be possible.
Thanks so much, Kim.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah. This show would not be possible without the amazing support of great sponsors, and I feel very honored and lucky. So endless gratitude to the town of Aurora, who sees this as a real vision and really believes in this work. The Wholesome Conscious, which of course feeds us at our public events. Design to Plume, which created our amazing logo. And as always, we're powered by Neighbor Media. This studio is amazing. If you're looking for a place to be, I encourage you to contact them. But please take the time to like, follow, and share on this platform and about this platform through Spotify and YouTube. We're there. Ratings help. 5-star ratings are amazing. But also your comments. What are you thinking about? What do you want to hear about? Till next time, be well, everybody. Bamampi, Gigwamin Minowa.